mentioned the boards, it's important that the boards, of a church, and then if they have a ministry on the side, or if they have a Christian school, or if they have, they're all different kinds of a dream center or whatever. Uh, you don't want necessarily what's called interlocking boards, because that throws everything into one pot. And if something goes bad in one expression, it can actually affect the entire enterprise. And so again, that's where a good corporate lawyer, can really walk you through that, because it's straight corporate law at that point. Not taking your eye off the mission or the purpose or the true religious purpose of the organization, but understanding how all these things fit together so that you can do what God's called you to do. I mean, my mission is I want the church to be able to have the biggest footprint it can have in their community in all of its expressions. So just how do we do that? And there's got to be a lot of intentionality there.
Yeah, I mean, beyond the legalities of, avoiding interlocking boards, we often recommend separate boards for a different reason, which is that oftentimes churches have a tendency to be a bit insular, and by expanding your board outside of your normal church community, you're expanding your social capital, and you're able to invite people that would not necessarily be a member of your church, but they may share your passion for a particular ministry. And
That's right.
so you're able to draw upon expertise that may not reside within your small church community. So,
Yeah, that's right.
there's the
And
legal
there's a
side,
way.
and then there's, what can help you.
I think that's great. And also, if you're talking about a community development corporation, or if you're talking about, some kind of an expression in the community that is humanitarian or whatever, there are gifts and grants available, but not to a church. And so again, trying to set up that independent board, but there are ways that we do it so that the church doesn't lose control of that enterprise, that the DNA can't somehow go astray. And you can stitch all that together through just good corporate governance. So, but that's a good point to bring up, Rich, and I think it's important for people to understand that there is a difference.
Yeah, and since we're talking about boards, I love the. I guess it's a warning, but it's a great illustration of the worst case scenario. I guess it was um, a client, and you were interviewing the board members, and you found that one of their board members didn't really live up to your expectations. So maybe you want to tell that story.
Well, there's a chapter in there about, don't give a gun to a novice, and it's the idea of good training for the board. And what a lot of people don't understand is that a board of a nonprofit tax-exempt entity, whether it's incorporated or not, has a body of law sitting on it that it will be governed by. And the word is called a fiduciary. They have a fiduciary responsibility to operate in the best interest of the enterprise. And so that's an external test that will be given to a church or a ministry or anything along these lines. And so I was interviewing. What I do is when I'm called in to work with restructuring a church or updating their documents, I like to sit down with the control team and see, who the team is, who the executive team is. So it was way out in the western part of the country, and I was flown out there to meet with this church. And as I was sitting around the table, I was being introduced to the team, and they got to the treasurer and the comptroller. And she said, a very nice, unassuming, woman, middle-aged. And she said, well, first of all, I just want to thank Pastor Jones for giving me this great job since I got out of the penitentiary. And I'm looking around the table thinking this is a joke, right? But nobody's laughing. And so after the meeting, I took the pastor aside. I said, well, brother, tell me about Sister Smith. He says, oh yeah, she and her husband were convicted of money laundering and racketeering. But she didn't do it. She was just a unwitting pawn, and I really wanted to reinforce to her that we believe that God is a God of new beginnings. And I said, well, brother, that is a wonderful pastoral thought. You have a great pastor's heart. Unfortunately, it's not a president's thought, and you are the president of the corporation. And you cannot have a convicted felon as your treasurer and handling the money in this corporation. That violates your fiduciary responsibility. And so again, wearing both hats, great pastor hat, terrible president hat. And so understanding, who the board can be and can't be is just part of the education of the board.
When you talked about fiduciary responsibilities, you broke it down into 3 segments or tests, I guess you could call them: the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. Maybe you could explain, how each of those is thought of and implemented, to make sure that a board is doing what they're supposed to be doing, or to use these
Yeah,
words,
I will.
doing their duty.
And by the way, thanks for reading the book, Richard. I appreciate the actually read this. But again, this is law that is placed on boards, whether they know it or not. And the whole idea of this chapter in the book is to say, listen, a board member, just because they're your friend doesn't make them a good board member, or just because they're your golfing buddy, or because you guys hang out at art shows or whatever, that the board members have responsibilities that are placed on them no matter what. And these 3 duties are absolutely sacred inside the fiduciary world. The duty of care is basically saying that a board member has to be informed. And so if you have a board member who basically doesn't understand a simple financial report, or is not keeping abreast with the initiatives of the church or the organization, they're violating the duty of care, which is basically there is a duty to stay informed with the corporation or with the entity, and understand the facts, the consequences of all the decisions. And so that's the duty of care. The duty of loyalty means that basically the directors have to always operate in the best interest of the organization. So again, this isn't your personal piggy bank. This isn't everybody basically taking tax exempt money, which is a special designation of trust given to us out of privilege in our American law, and use it for your own personal gain or your own personal agenda. I had a pastor, again, out in the Midwest, who called me, and he'd taken over. He was the second pastor. The founder had retired, and the founder had been retired for some years, and this pastor had taken over. It was incorporated. Now he was the new president. And so he called me and he said, we were trying to do a building program, but the bank said I needed to have an attorney look at our deed. I said, why? And he said, well, can I send it to you? And so he sent me the deed to the property. Well, the founder had deeded the property in his own name, which is private inurement. You can't do that. This is not, you don't own this entity. It's owned by no one. It's a public trust run by a board of directors for the privilege of the congregants. And so that violated 501c3 rules and would have removed the tax exemption for the whole enterprise. So I called the pastor up, the founder, and I said, I'm sure you didn't intend to do this, just a mistake. We just need to do a transfer deed out of your name into the church's name. He said, no, I meant to do that. I meant for my sons to inherit this property of this church as one of their assets.
Oh boy.
I said, you can't do that. I said that's a violation of your duty of loyalty to operate always in the best interest of the church, not your personal interest. And so, make a long story short, we worked it out. It took me over a year to convince him to do the right thing rather than be disgraced.